At the exact midnight India finally won its freedom, 10 million of its citizens were suddenly running for their lives. To exit the country quickly, the British drastically accelerated the transfer of power. They hastily divided the subcontinent to create a new country, Pakistan. But the exact borders through Punjab and Bengal weren't fully announced. Overnight, massive panic erupted. Millions realized their ancestral homes were now on the wrong side of an invisible line. Families packed whatever they could carry and fled toward the new borders. Train cars became so overloaded that people clung to the roofs, many riding directly into unimaginable communal violence. This overnight chaos sparked one of the largest mass migrations in human history. So while politicians in New Delhi delivered triumphant speeches, Mahatma Gandhi was nowhere near the celebrations. He spent Independence Day walking barefoot through burning villages, trying to stop the slaughter. August 15th is rightfully remembered as a triumph of sovereignty, but that celebratory anniversary is permanently bound to the tragic legacy of partition. It was a first morning of freedom paid for by the displacement of 10 million people. On the night of August 14, 1947, New Delhi's Constituent Assembly was a hive of historic preparation. But outside those walls, across Punjab and Bengal, millions of families were facing a terrifying reality. While leaders prepared for a midnight session, ordinary citizens were packing whatever they could carry, unsure if their homes would still exist by morning. This moment had been nearly 2 centuries in the making. British rule didn't begin with a sudden military takeover. As this diagram shows, the East India Company functioned as a corporate entity that gradually expanded its influence. From a commercial victory in Bengal in 1757, they slowly traded commerce for administration, until a corporation backed by military power governed millions. That system collapsed under the weight of the Great Rebellion in 1857. The uprising spread so far across northern and central India that the British Crown was forced to step in directly. The company was dissolved and the British Raj began, placing the subcontinent under the direct control of the monarchy. By 1885, a new political consciousness emerged with the founding of the Indian National Congress. What began as a group of elites seeking moderate reform eventually transformed into a mass movement. Students, workers, and farmers all began to organize around the idea of Swaraj, self-rule. The British government faced a problem that military power alone could not solve. They now had to manage a massive population that was becoming organized, vocal, and increasingly aware of its own right to rule. Political nationalism soon entered everyday life. Following the 1905 partition of Bengal, the Swadeshi movement turned economic choices into acts of defiance. Clothing, shopping, and even education became ways to publicly reject British authority. Then came Mohandas Gandhi, who connected political resistance to social reform. He encouraged Indians to reject dependence on British goods and use tools like the traditional wooden spinning wheel to reclaim economic power, turning a simple craft into a symbol of a global movement. On April 13, 1919, the relationship between the rulers and the ruled was permanently damaged. British troops opened fire on an unarmed crowd at Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar. The massacre shocked the nation and destroyed any remaining belief that colonial rule was a benevolent force. Gandhi's commitment to nonviolence often forced the movement into a standstill. He was willing to halt massive protests, even at the height of their momentum if violence occurred, prioritizing the moral character of the resistance over immediate political gains. The independence movement was never a single path. While Gandhi preached nonviolence, a younger generation, led by Bhagat Singh, saw British rule as an oppressive system that had to be challenged through direct revolutionary confrontation. By collecting salt from the coast during his 1930 march, Gandhi turned a basic human necessity into a symbol of defiance. He demonstrated that if millions simply refused to obey colonial laws, the empire would eventually lose the ability to govern them. Subhas Chandra Bose imagined a different route. During the Second World War, he sought international support to build the Indian National Army, believing the British would only leave India if faced with an organized military force. The Second World War changed the timeline. Britain emerged from the conflict economically and militarily exhausted, while the millions of Indian soldiers who had served abroad returned home with heightened expectations for self-government. As negotiations for power began, a major political divide emerged. While the Indian National Congress sought a united country, the Muslim League under Muhammad Ali Jinnah demanded a separate homeland, and the two visions became increasingly difficult to reconcile. By 1945, the British were committed to a transfer of power. The question was no longer whether India would become free, but whether the subcontinent could be divided without collapsing into total civil war. Lord Louis Mountbatten arrived as the final viceroy in early 1947. He quickly accelerated the timeline for withdrawal, announcing in June that the subcontinent would be divided into two independent dominions in just a few weeks. This created a massive, immediate logistical crisis. Administrative departments had to be divided, military equipment was rapidly sorted, and the armed forces themselves separated, all while the final borders between the two new nations remained completely unknown to the public. The cost of this haste was borne by the people. Partition displaced around 10 million refugees and ignited severe violence in Punjab and Bengal. For millions of ordinary families, the arrival of independence meant losing their homes and desperately searching for missing relatives. Gandhi spent August 15th in Bengal, away from the festivities in the capital. He believed political freedom was hollow if ordinary people could not live together in peace, and he spent his day walking through communities deeply affected by the violence. This duality is what defines August 1947. The monumental political success of achieving sovereignty is inseparable from the human suffering caused by the division of the country. On the night of August 14th, the Constituent Assembly gathered to witness the final moments of British rule. After generations of struggle, the transfer of power was minutes away. Jawaharlal Nehru addressed the Assembly, speaking not just of the victory of independence, but of the responsibility that came with it. He argued that the future would require a dedicated effort to end poverty, ignorance, and disease. At the stroke of midnight, British rule in India ended. The empire that had governed the subcontinent for generations withdrew, and a new government took full responsibility for the nation. The tricolor flag was raised as the symbol of a sovereign state. It was no longer the banner of a protest movement. It was now the official flag of a country that was responsible for its own future. On the first morning of freedom, the new nation stood alone. There was no longer a foreign empire to blame for failure, nor could a colonial government be credited for success. India's path was now entirely in its own hands. The leaders understood that political sovereignty was only the beginning. True freedom would remain out of reach if citizens continued to live without education, opportunity, or basic dignity. The new administration faced a staggering list of tasks from day one. They had to write a constitution, integrate hundreds of princely states, manage a massive refugee crisis, and build a functioning economy for a divided population. That effort was built on the foundation laid by countless unnamed people. Revolutionaries, soldiers, and ordinary protesters had sacrificed their livelihoods, and often their lives, without ever knowing if they would see this day. The survival of this diverse democracy was a radical, unproven experiment. The work beginning on August 15th would decide whether hundreds of millions of people could truly transform a divided colony into a single, functioning nation. The night passed. The date changed to August 15th, 1947. For the first time in 2 centuries, the British Empire no longer ruled India. Jawaharlal Nehru, who had spent years locked inside British prisons, was now standing on the platform of the Red Fort as India's first prime minister. In Delhi, the streets filled with millions of citizens. They gathered to watch the tricolor flag move in the wind, witnessing the exact moment a colonial subject became a sovereign people. But the man who spent decades mobilizing the masses to reach this morning was nowhere near the capital. Mahatma Gandhi skipped the capital celebrations entirely. He was actively avoiding the crowds to address the reality on the ground. The treaties were signed and political freedom was secured on paper, but actual peace had not arrived. When the British departed, they divided their territory into India and Pakistan. This jagged line, drawn abruptly across the map, sliced straight through local geography. A village operating under one system for generations suddenly found itself stranded on the other side of a foreign border. Absolute terror took hold. Hindus and Sikhs moved toward India, while many Muslims moved toward Pakistan. Within weeks, an estimated 10 million people were forced to abandon their homes and migrate toward their respective majorities. The sheer volume of human movement warped the country's infrastructure. Standard railway lines, built for ordinary travel, were swallowed completely by refugees desperate to survive the journey across the new frontier. Sprawling makeshift settlements appeared almost overnight. Displaced families crowded into tents, searching for separated relatives and waiting for basic food supplies. The newly formed governments inherited a massive logistical and humanitarian crisis on day one. The stroke of a pen in London triggered one of the largest and most chaotic mass migrations in human history. The first day of national sovereignty was simultaneously a devastating national emergency. This is the reality Gandhi chose to face on the morning of August 15th. He was navigating the streets of Calcutta in Bengal. The region had been decimated by communal rioting, leaving the streets physically scarred by the violence. He maintained a strict ideological objection to the festivities in Delhi. To him, establishing a formal government meant absolutely nothing if citizens were actively slaughtering one another. Rather than standing on a ceremonial stage, he walked directly into the damaged neighborhoods. He met with local leaders and ordinary civilians, acting as a physical intervention between fractured communities to beg for an end to the sectarian attacks. Gandhi skipped the capital to launch an active, desperate mission. The British Empire was gone, but the hatred remained. He knew the internal divisions of partition could easily destroy the country before it even had a chance to govern. On that single morning, two simultaneous realities existed. In the capital, the new administration anchored the official political victory by hoisting the flag. Out in the provinces, a fractured population was exhausted, simply trying to survive. Prime Minister Nehru used his midnight address to lay out the enormous institutional responsibilities ahead: building a functioning economy, securing the new borders, and drafting a constitution. But the hardest work was already happening miles away from the government buildings. By walking through the riots of Calcutta, Gandhi was actively demonstrating the heaviest responsibility of citizenship, trying to stitch together a common identity out of a deeply divided society. Gandhi's absence suggests a specific takeaway for the 15th of August. He treated independence as a starting point rather than a finish line, a responsibility that requires active maintenance every single day.